I wanted to touch upon the idea. I'm very skeptical that international law can be used as a primary agent against terrorism. I think that you have countless cases where that has actually been the contrary. Rwanda, Darfur, Bosnia, Somalia. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. What I'm skeptical about, too, is that the primary institutions that are international institutions responsible against terrorism, such as the UN, NATO, and or even the IMF, all have a really bad record on those issues. Actually, I wish it were different. Personally, I don't. I'm not advocating all-out militarism. However, what I am saying is that I think we need to look at all those institutions and examine their record. The United Nations is also seen as a conduit of U.S. power, Western power. The IMF, the same thing, with structural loan programs in terms of to countries that often lead to dependency and exploitation. And then in terms of NATO is seen as a four-letter word, or it is it's an acronym, but you see what I'm getting at. Throughout the Muslim world, NATO is basically thought of as the United States, or for intervention, or for mass killings. So I think that international law has often been futile and even contributed to some of the problems with ethnic conflict resolution. I wish that were different, but I also see that military might can be used for justification in certain areas, such as Osama bin Laden or Muammar Gaddafi going after them. So.
Okay. Lots of hands here, right across the table. Yeah, this is a good conversation.
My comment kind of goes off of that, and it's like half a comment, half a question. You were talking before about the war in Afghanistan and kind of war of occupation and how that's like not really a positive way to go about it. And like in the wake of September 11th, obviously there was a ton of anger and a ton of animosity towards the people who had done this.
Right.
And so obviously the United States was going to take some action. But I similarly am kind of skeptical of the powers of international law. And I also kind of wonder how you separate the governments that harbor these terrorist groups from the terrorist groups themselves. And so, like in the United States, going after Osama bin Laden, like that was cathartic, and we took him out, and the same thing could have been done for other top leaders of Al Qaeda and similar terrorist groups. But how do you make an actual lasting impact in eliminating terrorism by just targeting individuals, or is that I don't know.
Well, good questions. In our own country, domestically, we try to live with the rule of law. So if we didn't have the rule of law and police forces, we'd be on our own to defend ourselves, and whoever had the biggest guns and biggest local armies would be the warlords who ran the country. But internationally, we don't really have there's no international police force, really. The UN has a very incompetent group of people, but international law isn't functioning in the ways it was intended to, that's for sure. The question is the answer to actually make international law function the way it's supposed to, or are we just in an anarchical global environment, and that depends on the warlords, we being one, using their weapons to enforce their own interests. And does the rest of the world trust the United States to be the enforcer of global values? Whose values are we? We didn't do Darfur. We did do Iraq. In fact, a friend of mine is a British general, and he runs a whole special forces division that does military forces, policing, road, building bridges, all kinds of nation-building things. It's quite an unusual division. And I said, his name is Tim Cross, I said, Tim, could your division have gone and protected Darfur? And he says, oh yeah, my division is perfect for that. We could, because there was only these Janjaweed thugs who were doing this, and they're not that many, and we could have dealt with that. Why didn't you do that? Because the British couldn't do that again after Iraq. After we went into Iraq, we couldn't possibly go into another Muslim country and do that thing again. So the war in Iraq prevented us from doing something more focused internationally in Darfur, for example. So the question is, what would it take for international law to work? What would it take for the IMF and not to be just a extension, you're right, Joan is right, of Western economics? They're not credible. If you don't have that, you're left with an anarchical global situation where the rule of force replaces the rule of law. So how do we resolve these things? And your question is, if we would have gone after these were a band of criminals who murdered in a cowardly way innocent civilians because of their grievances. How do you bring them justice, or how do you deal with an Afghan government, Taliban at the time, that was protecting them, so they argued that you can't allow the Taliban to protect them, but then how many innocent Afghans are we allowed to die here because of a long war in Afghanistan? What's police action? What's bringing someone to justice? And what is a long counterinsurgency trying to rebuild another nation like Afghanistan over 10 years? How do we sort out those purposes and policies? That's what we haven't been able to do. Because there's justification, I think, for going after those who have committed such atrocities and those who protect them. But then it's led to a 10-year war in Afghanistan, which has gone so badly for us.